My name is Daniel McCaw, and I am the fisheries biologist for the Penobscot Indian Nation in Old Town, Maine. Dams have negatively affected salmon since the first dams were built on the river 200 years ago. Some of the acute effects would be lack of upstream passage, delay in upstream passage, mortality, direct mortality from downstream passage, lack of downstream passage as far as it being efficient, delayed mortality with regards to downstream passage. In addition, dams impound free-flowing reaches of rivers and turn them into quasi-lakes. They're not really lakes. They don't function quite as lakes do because there's so much water coming in and out of them. So what happens is those impoundments create habitats that are very suitable for predators and exotic species. Here on the Penobscot River, we have a world-class smallmouth bass fishery, which is a non-native fish to the state of Maine and certainly is a predator for juvenile Atlantic salmon. In addition, these impoundments, because they slow the water down, they increase the surface area exposed to sunlight. They also cause unnatural raising of temperatures, which affects salmon migration, both upstream and downstream, which are very much cued by temperatures. One thing I would add as Dan, the fisheries biologist in general, not Dan necessarily the fisheries biologist for the tribe, but as just as a fisheries biologist in general, dams are the biggest detriment to our sea-run fish and even our resident fish. There'll be some argument with that, but certainly with our sea-run fish, they are the hugest impediment to restoration of these fish. I know that there are dams on the outlets of lakes around the state that are more controversial because now you've got camp owners, whether they be tribal or non-tribal camp owners, that have lived for generations on these camps or have recreated at these camps for generations, and the lake level is just how they want it, and they don't necessarily want dams removed at the end of these lakes. However, lake outlet dams are not as big of a threat to Atlantic salmon as these main stem dams are. So I would think, based on the history of the Penobscot River Restoration Project, the tribe is very supportive of main stem dam removals in the Penobscot. And I certainly am 100% in favor of it. If I had a magic wand, if I could play God for a day, I would create an energy source that didn't require hydro dams anymore, and I would remove every one of them from every river system in Maine, immediately. But, I got into fisheries because I was passionate about it, and I realized that mankind has destroyed their runs. We altered the habitat. We used the river for our own uses, and now all these fish are gone, or the majority of them are gone. And so everything has changed, and it's really sad. But because Americans, they like their standard of living. They like electricity. And I do too, sure. And historically, hydropower was a very cheap way to produce electricity and reliable as compared to burning coal or other methods that were used historically. But what happens is society likes electricity. We get used to it. We get used to it being cheap. These companies that are in the energy production business, they get to harness the river for their own needs, and they put energy into the grid, and they get paid handsomely for it, and they move forward. Hydropower, it's interesting. I've been in so many hydro dams over the past 13 years. You look at these huge turbines, these huge generating facilities. They were all built about 100 years ago, and the technology has changed only minutely since then. So we're using 100-year-old technology to produce electricity at the detriment of our sea-run fish, which at one point in time provide for entire civilizations to exist. So it's a catch-22, The modern world is a great thing on so many levels. I can go on my computer and find any information I want in 2 minutes. But at the same time, that energy has to come from somewhere. So my general impression is, ideologically speaking, salmon restoration has changed. It's changed over the past 100 years. Originally, the thought was, okay, if we can provide them passage, if we can stock as many fish as we can possibly afford, the salmon will come back on their own. Well, despite millions and millions and millions, and I mean millions of fish stocked over 100 years, despite the improvements of fish passage up until a year or so ago, the salmon numbers have continued to dwindle. Now, we're on the edge of extinction. We certainly are. There's no question about it. And yes, we can keep the species alive in a hatchery, but our wild fish are on the edge of extinction. However, ideologically speaking, that management strategy has changed. Now they realize, okay, we need the best fishways in the world. In addition to that, we need to connect these fish to their upstream habitats. So over the past several years, a lot of these culverts have been replaced. A lot of these remnant dams have been removed. And that effort, which is a multi-pronged effort, state, federal, and non-government groups such as the Atlantic Salmon Federation, Trout Unlimited, folks like that who are involved, these efforts are going on all over the landscape right now, which is a huge difference. When I first started in 2001, no one was doing habitat work, very little. Everything was about stocking fish, how do we stock a better fish, how do we stock them more successfully, and how do we get our fish back. But now the focus has changed. Let's reconnect that watershed, let's make it a functioning ecosystem. It's this ecosystem approach and also a multi-species approach.